what we'll do is we'll use the chat function, and then as we go, we'll hopefully be able to kind of jump in and have you actually ask the questions verbally, and we'll stop along the way. So without further ado, take it away.
Okay, thanks. It's really nice to be here visually on video. And I should say we're going to also have a lot of time for questions at the end, so don't feel as though you have to get everything in during. We, at the conversation, as I guess you all know, we are an outlet online for scholars to write about their research and their findings and share it with the public. And, you know, we have found that we really need to explain to scholars, why should you do that? And then get on to how to do it well, because for most, we totally recognize that for nearly all scholars at US colleges and universities, this kind of outreach is not part of the core responsibilities that you have. You've got committees, you've got teaching, you've got research grants, you've got all these other things. So, you know, we really do think that there are a lot of ways that doing this can benefit you. And so we think it's really good to just, you know, kind of tick off what they are and show why we think this is worth the time investment. So that's really kind of what this talk is about here. First of all, here is a look at the Conversations science page on a random day back in the spring, just to give you a sense of some of the kinds of articles that scholars write for us. They can
Jenny, really quickly, I don't mean to intervene. You got to share your screen first.
Oh gosh.
We're not seeing your screen. Yep. It happens.
I jumped ahead. Hang on a sec. All right, hang on here. Fix the view. Okay. All right, let's try it again. Here we go. Good. All right, how's that? There we go. Okay, anyway, so this is just a quick glimpse at one of our pages to give you a little bit of an idea of one way to share your research with the public. We are certainly not the only one, but we're one of many routes for doing it. Why should you use your precious time to share your scholarship this way, especially given all the demands that academia already makes on your time? So first of all, here are the sort of greater good reasons. You can help the public in a lot of ways: myth busting, explaining complicated things, getting facts out, offering information people can use. Another reason that I think is really valuable, especially in complicated times like these, is to inspire people. You know, if you are doing work that offers an opportunity or leverage on tackling a really big problem, you can show that there are solutions and explain what it would take to put them into operation and make them work. You know, and then it also can benefit you and your career in a lot of ways. You could benefit you and your institution. So you can help explain to taxpayers what their money is funding if you're at a publicly funded school, build public support for knowledge, get people to do things like March for Science, which didn't happen accidentally. I mean, there was a lot of work going into convincing people that science really matters. Showing that your school is publicly engaged and the research has impact, increase your visibility, and you can improve your communication skills. This very, very animated guy on the left is named Joseph Charbon, and in this picture, he was a fifth-year PhD student at Cal Berkeley when he won a competition that they run there every year called the Grad Slam, where they have master's and PhD students enter and they compete to present their research in an engaging 3-minute talk to a general audience. So when they enter it, they get lots of coaching on presentations and stuff. And then there's a winner at each campus, and then the campus winners go up against each other, and the winner of the champion of the whole thing gets a check from the president of the UC system. And after he won, he said that he decided to enter because here's what he said: the ability to contextualize and defend your research is a huge part of the research process itself. Knowing the answer to high-level questions like, why are you studying this? Why is this important? Not only makes your research more useful and fundable, it also helps to guide you on your search for truth and benefit to society. Bringing that down to earth a little bit, people have told us that writing for us has helped them do conference talks, job talks, elevator speeches about their work when they're meeting people at meetings in the afterworld, after pandemics, when we can have meetings again. It just really helps them sort of get to the point and articulate what their work is about much more clearly. We have surveyed people who have written for us, and here are some of the outcomes that writing for us has led to with other scholars. It has helped them build connections with other researchers, and sometimes it's connected them with university presses to write a book or with other media outlets for interviews. Here are a few peer-reviewed citations showing that scientific outreach has an impact. It can increase the metrics for your articles and newspaper coverage of the issues that you work on. Now, why should you work with journalists when journalists and scholars work so differently on different timescales and levels of complexity and things like that? Both groups have a lot of things in common that may not be so obvious. I mean, they both really are about clear and accurate information. Journalists have a more urgent time scale, but not always a lot more urgent, honestly. I mean, not all stories are breaking news, far from it. So, you know, if you feel as though working with the media means you have to be available like in 9 seconds to be on the phone, that is not always the case at all. And journalists and scholars both bring something to the table when they're covering an issue. Scholars have the deep subject expertise, and journalists know how to shape a story about it. And when you can connect those two skills together, that's when you get good coverage. It really takes both. So think of it as a partnership. Sorry. When you're going to share your research with the public, it is really important at a sort of macro level to understand that it's very different from talking to other scholars. This really is sort of the biggest thing I hope you take away from this today. If you think about how you communicate with other scholars, whatever your field is, you know, you write journal articles and monographs and scholarly publications, you present at conferences, you know, and you may blog and do stuff like that. But there are certain ways that this kind of communication works. Everyone in your field has some common knowledge base of what you're talking about, whether it's ecological entomology or, you know, sustainability in business or something, whatever it is. There is a presumption that if you're in the same field, you have some amount of interest in what other people have to say and what they're doing. And often there's a lot of specialized language, and using it kind of connotes, yes, we both work on this, we both get this topic. It sort of connotes we're connected and we have something in common with each other. The public does not get their information that way, of course. I mean, you know, and most of the news media reports that the public sees are much shorter and less detailed than the kind of things that scholars produce. They're written in simpler language, and they don't assume that people have prior knowledge about the topic, and so they provide some context. The charts here just sort of break down what kinds of media different people, different age groups get their stuff from. So younger people go more on social media, and older people go more to older legacy sources like newspapers. But, you know, basically the point is general interest media is a very different way of consuming information. And when you're trying to communicate with the general public, you can't always assume that they come to the topic saying, yes, I want to know all about this, tell me more. So you need to give them some reason to care about it. So to sum this up, you know, you need to meet people where they are, your audience where they are. You're going to need to condense your information and figure out what are the really sort of most important points to get across, not worry about getting every single detail in. You need to really avoid specialized terminology, because the effect it has when you're trying to reach the general public is the opposite of when you're trying to reach people in your field. It drives them away. It says, this is not your subject because you don't know what this word is. And that's very much the effect it has when people are reading something and they come across unfamiliar terms. So you need to be willing to trade off some of the comprehensive approach that you might make if you were talking to other scholars in return for reaching a broader audience. And this is, some people sometimes assume that this means dumbing down what you're talking about. That is not what we're saying. You can still talk about very complex concepts. You need to use accessible language to talk about them. I mean, I work with scholars who are explaining things like how tornadoes form, which is actually really complicated. And we have all kinds of other complex ideas in the stories that we do, but the wording has to help people approach it. One point that I want to also emphasize here is that you may be working on grants, non-disclosure agreements, things like that, that restrict what kind of stuff you can share. And so, of course, that kind of reviewing those things is an important part of preparing for this, understanding sort of what you can and can't put out in public. I can't summarize this any better than Dr. Fauci, who I would say is one of the best people out there right now communicating complicated information that's critical to the public in a very accessible way. And this is a comment he just made in a webinar last month. So, what does this mean for when you're going to start communicating? When you think about shaping a message, and one important thing is that you do not want to save your big takeaway at the end, which is the conventional structure in an academic journal article. You start with all the background and why did we look at this and how did we do it, and you get to the big point at the end. You need to flip that triangle over when you're talking to general interest audiences, because what they want to know when they are, you know, tuning into you in a radio interview or reading your article or what is this going to tell me? And if they don't feel as though they have a good idea of what it's going to tell them, they're going to go listen to or read or do something else. So you need to state your key point up front, and then you'll expand on it as you go. Don't bury the lead. It also is important to realize the general public is not just one enormous block of people. There are many subgroups. So first of all, the people who will consume news is one set of the public. A lot of the public doesn't, obviously. You may be thinking about an issue that's relevant locally, an issue that's relevant to people who know a certain field, people who are affected by, they have some common factor, whether it's their age or their ethnicity or whatever, policymakers, funders. So, you know, thinking about who you're talking to and what those people are or aren't likely to know, so that you can meet them where they are. And then what do you want to achieve when you set out to communicate? Suppose that your issue is pesticide residues on food. If you want to convince plaid shirt guy here at the grocery store that he should be concerned about them, then, you know, that kind of dictates how you'll talk about it and what kind of outlet you might try to use or work with to reach him. It's going to be very different than if you want state legislators to hold a hearing on it. So thinking about, you know, what you hope that your message will accomplish is important too. And then how do you meet with journalists and how do you get to know what they do and what they want? You know, I think this is really not something that's very intuitive because, like I said, they're very different communities. First of all, I want to say that school news offices, college and university news offices and communications teams, in our experience, are very underused resources. And so I really urge all scholars to work with their school news offices. If you are doing research, if you're going to have a publication in an important journal in your field, tell them ahead of time. I can't tell you how many comments people say, I wish I'd known that was coming out. I would have had them pitch an article to you. They're really good, and think of them as the bridge between you and your work and the media world. I mean, that's their job. So, so really, you know, work with them. And if they think that it would be great to do a press release about something you have coming out, or consider having you pitch an article about it somewhere, you know, work with them on it and they can really help you. Look for training on how to present things and, you know, talk and, you know, do stuff for audiences that are not scholars. And then using social media as a listening tool. And what I mean here is use it not so much to broadcast stuff and to tell people things, which is the way that we all think about social media. I misunderstood Twitter for years. I just thought of it as, you know, who wants to know what I had for lunch? And finally, someone said to me, it's a really great way to see what other people are thinking about. I kind of went, oh. So consider using social media. Twitter and Reddit are particularly good for this, but Facebook can also be one if you look at groups that are interested in things, to see who's talking about whatever your issue is. What are they saying? What are the questions they have? If you know scholars in your field who do a lot of public communication and are good at it, just follow them and see what they do. What do they say? What do they post? Who reacts? Who do they interact with? Follow some journalists who cover the issues, the things that you work on, and, you know, see what they're saying on social about, you know, are they asking questions? You know, just sort of see what the discussion's about. It can be really interesting, and it can spark ideas for you. Meet journalists. This should say at conferences, not science conferences. I apologize. That's a mistake in there, because I know that we're not all scientists here. But when you're at conferences, in those happy times when we can go to meetings again, you know, look and see who's covering it. Who are the outlets who have sent journalists there? If there are media sessions at the conference, drop by one and see what kinds of questions they're asking. I mean, it just gives you a sense of what are they thinking about with respect to your field. And when you see coverage of something that you know about, if you think it's good, you know, shoot them a, post a comment. If it's an outlet that allows that, post a comment online, send them a tweet or something and say, hey, that was really good. I haven't seen such a good explanation of that anywhere. Or if you think they've missed something and you know about it, say, hey, you might want to consider this next time. You know, and you don't necessarily then automatically become a big source for them, but, you know, it's a good way to sort of just make that contact and establish yourself as a potential source for them.
Jenny, very quickly, if you don't mind,
Sure.
we are lucky enough to have Melissa Lindell here with us today, who is actually part of our university's external relations. So I was hoping that maybe she could take a minute or two just to introduce herself for those who don't know her, although she's a rock star, so everybody knows her. But then just sort of say what her office does and perhaps how they can be helpful in terms of this particular topic.
Great, please do. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. So I'm part of Kelly's team. I'm the director of media relations, as many of you know. And so, like Jenny said, we are here to get your research out there. And so, like she said, if I know of something that's coming out, I'd love to do a news release on it or pitch you as a thought expert to a publication or things like that. We have several different ways to do that in the things that we employ in our office. And so it would be great to know. As we've said before, we don't know what we don't know. So until you tell us what's going on, and you might, Kelly likes to say that Clarkson people are very, they have a lot of humility, and it's Clarkson humble. And so people are like, oh, it's no big deal. Well, it is a big deal. Anything that you have going on, we want to know about. And we've been doing quarterly marketing meetings with the schools and the departments and get a lot of that info from there. But the more we can get from you yourself, you're your own best advocate. So please feel free to reach out. Kelly shared the form in the chat where you can request a news release. And if you forget about that link, you can just always email me or Kelly and it'll get to us and we'll make something happen.
Great,
Okay,
thank you.
great. Absolutely. And I mean, I wouldn't be so emphatic about this if I hadn't had numerous communications officers at many of the dozens of schools that we work with say, I really wish they'd tell me when they have stuff like this coming. So I know it's a very widespread frustration. And if you have an article coming out, you're really busy. I know you're like reviewing the proofs and doing all that stuff you have to do, but it just can be really helpful to tell your communications team. So again, this is kind of reiterating here. If you are thinking about, being pitched as an expert to the media or pitching an article of your own or something like that, who are you interested in reaching? So, and for what reasons? And now, if you're going to pitch a story, if you're going to pitch, writing something for us or for another outlet, here is the key questions that editors will have. Why this story? Why now? And why you? And so what they mean by that is, first of all, why is this story interesting and relevant to people who are not scholars in your field? Why now is, why is it timely? What is it that makes it relevant now? It can be, my study is just about to be published. That's newsworthy in itself. But if it's related to things going on in the news, that's helpful. Sometimes it's just a cool discovery that's about things like how sponges hold on really tightly to rocks or something like that. So sometimes it's just coolness. But if there is a timely angle, the media is always looking for timely angles to things. And then why you, what the question really is there is, why are you the right person to tell this story? What is the expertise that you have about it? Have you done a cool kind of news survey? Have you done field research in an interesting way? Have you written 3 books about it and you know this inside out? So just, what is it that makes you the person as opposed to someone else who might be pitching the same story, the person that they want to hear from? This is more starting to get into the structure of a story. So he's getting a bit more detailed, but you want to start thinking about going back to the idea that readers or listeners may not be inherently interested in, I'll give you an example of a scholar I'm working with right now on a column. How are pikas surviving climate change in the high alpine regions in California? And the surprising answer is they're actually doing pretty well, when everybody thought that because they live in these high cold areas and the mountains are getting warmer, they would all be gone soon. Poor little pikas. They're these cute little creatures who look like tiny rabbits. He has a great opening to his story, which is talking about when he goes hiking and doing research in these high mountainous areas in the Sierra Nevadas. He has a pika t-shirt that he wears a lot. He's been doing this for years. And he said, people come up and go, oh, we're so sad about pikas. They're all going to disappear. And he says, no, they're not. My research totally finds a different answer to this, but he says this narrative that they're like a climate doom species has completely gripped the public, and here's why it's wrong, and here's how the research got so wrong. So we're working on a piece about that. But that's a cool opening because it just shows you that this particular view of the thing he works on has taken hold so strongly, and he has to constantly rebut it. And then that gives him a natural springboard to go, here's how I know. So anyway, so, you're going to want to think about anything you can do that can sort of get people into it. If you have a cool statistic from your research, did you know that 50% of X does Y? That's a great way to start. If you have an anniversary, media outlets are amazingly predictable in how much they like anniversaries. If it's an anniversary of something significant, especially if it is a number that ends in a 5 or a 0. So it's like a round number. Someone's birth, someone's death, when they did something, things like that. So anyway, there are lots of ways to get into a story, but you're probably going to want something like it. Editors can help with this. That's part of our jobs. If you want to pitch to the conversation, this is on our homepage. We have a place, this is sort of on the right-hand side of the page when you scroll down some, and we have a portal here, and a lot of other outlets work this way too. When you go into our portal, you see a form that looks like this, and this is basically our version of the why this story, why now, why you question. One thing to know in particular about us, if you decide you're interested in pitching a story to us, is that we do not want you to send us a whole draft already written. We really like to talk to scholars if they haven't already written for us before they start writing, so they understand our style and our voice and format and things like that. So what we want is a few sentences about your story, why it's interesting, significant, anything else important to know. I studied this in Peru for 2 years, something like that. Whether you have video or things like that that would work with it, and why is it timely and relevant. So that's the way it works. And then a few things about pitching. And I was, like I said, I was a freelancer for 10 years and wrote for many outlets, including some very large ones like Audubon and Popular Mechanics and things like that. I got turned down all the time. So pitching stories is or pitching yourself as an expert is a complicated process. It's interesting. It can be really kind of fun if you get into it. But there are certain things you can control and certain things you can't. You can research the outlet that you would like to work with and see what they've already done. It's always embarrassing when you pitch a story and they say, that's a great idea. We published that story on Tuesday. You're kind of like, oh. So researching and seeing what they've done on your topic and crafting a pitch that works well. Again, work with your comms team if you're doing this, if you want help. You can't control what's going on in the news cycle. So if you're pitching a story and it's just completely unrelated to huge world events that are, California is all on fire and stuff like that, they just may not have time for you. And that's not that your pitch is bad, it's just that it's bad timing. You can't control if they've already thought of that and has commissioned something. You can't control if they decided we only want to cover this story if it's in the West, things like that. There can be a lot of things going on in the editor's heads that you don't know about. Most of the scholars who pitch stories to me and I work with are really nice and, and understand when we say, I can't take this because of these reasons. Once in a while, I get someone who literally says something to me like, well, that's a really narrow view of the issue. Don't you understand how important this is? And I just want to say that that's really not going to help you fighting back. So, you may not agree with an editor's stated reason for taking something or for interviewing you or not. And if you respectfully say, well, can I say why you don't think that's really a priority thing? Then, they'll probably, chances are they'll tell you, but I would just recommend not fighting with them because you're burning your bridge before you've even set foot on it. And then to sum up, just, a lot of pitches get turned down. I mean, the ratio varies from desk to desk across our organization and depends on what's going on in the news. But in general, I would say, at least on the environment desk, I take about a quarter on average of the pitches that I get overall, and about a third of the ones that I get from partner schools. And the fact that we take more from partner schools reflects that we do sessions like this where we talk to people about how to pitch us and what we're looking for, and they get requests from us every day for topics where we're looking for authors and things. So partner schools are friends with benefits, as they should be. So anyway, but a lot of people get turned down. A lot of scholars who've written frequently for us send us ideas and get turned down. So think of it as like a baseball player trying to have a good average, and that's a sort of realistic way to approach it. And it also means that good pitches can get turned down for reasons that have nothing to do with you, and not to take it personally. I realize that this is a lot of information to throw to people at once, so people are not always eager to sort of step forward and say, let me pitch you my research. But I would be happy if anyone would like to just, in a general way, put forward, here's what I'm working on. Would this be a story? Here are what I think are the really important things about it. So if anybody would like to give it a shot, you are welcome to. And that's what I've got to say. I'll put those back up there in case anybody wants to take a stab at it.
I'll try.
Okay.
So just give you kind of the nutshell based on these bullet points is what you're looking for?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And I should say that 800 to 1,000 words is our target length, which is about a third longer than an op-ed you'd see in the newspaper. But we know that's an abstract and not an article for scholars.
So we found out that women in higher education experience less gender bias than 3 other comparative industries, specifically healthcare, faith-based community nonprofit organizations, as well as law. So you've got higher ed, women in higher ed seem to have the most welcoming and inclusive environment, whereas women in law have it more akin to a hellish environment, if you will. So that would be sort of the crux of the punchline of what we found.
Mm-hmm.
How would I frame that if I was coming to you at the conversation?
I think my first question, if you would approach me with that, would be, well, so is your story, what is your takeaway point of this? So what you've got is sort of, you've got these findings, but then you need something interpreting them, helping people understand, what do I pull out of this? So are you saying it's not as bad for women in academia as people think? Or are you saying, you know, law is worse, you know, law really stinks for women? I mean, which of those, you know, the fact that academia is better, is that your key thing? Or is it these other fields are worse? You know, what is it that you're drawing out of those?
Well, more or less, I think the latter, it sucks to be a woman lawyer based on environmental structure and environmental pressures that create a very male cultural environment, normative cultural environment. Mm-hmm. But inherently, I think the big thing that what really got us starting with that research or with that line of research was that we know that women experience bias very differently depending on the industries where they work. But we don't really know what that means outside of specifically some industries that seem to be very heavily scrutinized, like tech or like law enforcement. Those types of industries seem to draw a lot of attention from a standpoint of gender bias type studies. But the more women present industries like higher education, you know, obviously higher ed in general is more of a female dominant industry. And we still find bias present, but when you compare it to these other industries that we looked at, it's definitely less on the spectrum. So that was kind of the backstory.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, the differences could be interesting. You know, it could be, you know, women experience bias in all of these industries that we looked at, but it really was very strikingly different kinds.
Right,
so,
and,
you know,
and that's accurate. That's accurate.
Right. So that would be interesting in itself. Here's a comparison. And then there are, you know, journalists are always going to want sort of a so what at the end. You know, so it may be that, you know, for, you know, professional women, you need to really understand what are the particular challenges going to be in your field. You know, if you're not trying to be a firefighter, if you're a firefighter, it's probably going to be like physical strength, you know, things like that, and how people view you on that, you know, those physical strength performance things, which is a lot different from being a professor. Mm-hmm. So yeah, something like that. But, you know, definitely. So sort of, what is your really sort of key point, your key takeaway, and then kind of what, you know, sort of a so what from it. So what can people understand? Let me just be clear that we are not necessarily looking for like, what is an action item people should do? You know, we should all go lobby for, you know, X legal reform or something like that. But, you know, but there still should be sort of a like, so why is this important? Well, it's important if you want to see women get ahead and understand that there are very, you know, sort of field specific challenges, and we need more study of them within each field to really understand what is it about women in law? What is it about the way that the US legal system works and law firms are structured that creates those particular difficulties, as opposed to what women face if they want to be a physician or something like that.
Great,
yeah.
Thank you. Let's let someone else jump in here. Got a lot of great topics in the room.
Hi, Jennifer. It's Catherine Snyder. I'm in the Ed department at Clarkson.
Hi.
And, so I want to share an idea with you and then also ask you a timeline question. So I just sent off a manuscript to a journal that focused on how to build community in virtual environments with people who have never met before. So the setting was a a transition from a program that was traditionally very dependent on the in-person interaction that took place to build the success, and how we transitioned it to a virtual environment. And I think I can take that larger manuscript and boil it down to something like 10 strategies that would be generalizable across different settings, you know, how you can build community in virtual settings. So is that, I think it's relevant because of COVID and obviously the situation we're all in. So I guess the question is, how could I frame that? And then also, what's the timeline? So I just sent the manuscript into a journal for review this morning. So is it appropriate to wait to get a confirmation from a journal saying, yes, we're going to publish it? I'm just wondering about the timeline issue.
Sure, yeah. If you have something under review at a journal, then what we would really like to know is, you know, if it gets accepted, we would our ideal is to work with the scholar to have an article that's based on your journal study ready for us to post as soon as the journal study comes out. Because then, you know, a couple things. First of all, the fact that you have a new journal study out makes news outlets say, oh, they have a new study. Let's see if we want to cover it. So, you know, that sort of gives you, that's your news peg right there. And then second of all, we want to be able to drive traffic to your study, which is one thing that we've found happens when our scholars write for us. I mean, I've had scholars who have written articles for me about things like a very big technical paper they did on wetlands and why wetlands are underappreciated as carbon sinks. And they're just like, oh my God, we can't believe how the metrics went up when we published our article. This is so cool. So we wanted to try to, you know, boost traffic to your academic work too. And then the third reason for this is that many journals, although most of the ones that I know of that do it are in science, actually, I don't really know, so you tell me whether this happens in a field like education. When a journal has articles coming out, does it put an embargo on covering them until they're actually posted on the website? Because that's the common practice in science. And as I understand it, science journals do that because they don't want the science reporters to all run around and try and beat each other to the story and risk putting up stories that are rushed and potentially inaccurate. So science journals like, you know, science proceedings, things like that, have these embargo times, and you can know that an article is coming out, but coverage of it is embargoed till like 2 o'clock Thursday when they post their new studies. So we can have the story ready to go when we post it at 2:01 on Thursday. Now, I don't know if that's a thing so much in education or in social science fields, but if it's embargoed research, then obviously we can't post anything until the study is up.
Right. Yeah, it is the same with
it is okay.
I've worked with in the past. Yeah.
Right. So the timing for us would be what's ideal for us when you have something coming out in a significant journal in your field is to know anywhere from 2 or 3 days to a week ahead of time before it's going to be posted, before the journal is going to publish it, or as long ahead as you are willing to work with us and work on a piece. What the time that it takes for us to get a story edited and ready to go, you know, it varies on how sort of clean and well written your first draft is that comes in, but as a rule, you get at least 2 rounds of edits from us, and then there's some sort of back and forth and fine tuning and polishing, and there's some work on illustrating it and stuff like that. It can happen very fast if it needs to, like if someone is doing a reaction piece to a presidential debate, and so it's going to get posted in 3 hours. Most of our stories get edited over a period of several days. But if I start working on a story with someone on Monday, I'm hoping to have it done and posted by usually Wednesday or Thursday. So that is our general time frame.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then as far as framing a story on it, it sounds really interesting. I guess I would, if you pitched it, you know, phrased the way you did, I guess my first question would be, well, can you give me an example of some applications of this? So I'd want to know sort of, you know, what are different sort of fields where they could use this? So is this for education? If it's for education, at what levels? Is this also something that you think would work in business settings, in other settings like, you know, I don't know what they would be, community meetings, something like that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think we did look at the conversation and did a search for similar themed articles.
Mm-hmm.
And found one on faith-based organizations and how they're working to build community online. Mm-hmm. So I think that we could certainly include examples of it. It generally comes down to, I'd say, more professional settings.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you build community in professional settings with people who've never met before? So we could provide examples where we think strategies might apply.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that it's an interesting subject to me because it sounds like it could apply to a lot of different areas. If what you really wanted to do was show, educators how to use this at the college level or something, this gets back to that sort of who do you want to reach, which dictates kind of what's your outlet and what's your target. If you really wanted to reach a certain field or community, then I would say really focus your pitch and your examples on that area, like really focus it on college teaching or something. But if you see it as sort of, insights that can work for a lot of different fields, then present it that way.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, you bet. I am happy to do a little tour of our site and show what an author's dashboard looks like and things like that if people would like to ponder a little about whether to pitch or not.
That's probably useful because I think for a lot of us, given that our partnership with the Conversation is still relatively new, I believe the last academic year was when we firmed up the partnership, it's probably helpful to kind of explain process.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, let me do that. So, let me figure out how to get out of that.
You can unshare what you have up there and then actually flip to your desktop. Yep, you got it.
Okay, hang on a sec. Hang on. All right, here we go. Stop share. Okay. So, do this again. Okay, so you're seeing our web page now, right? There we go, our front page. Good. Okay. So front page with all our stories, our latest stories, sort of from newest moving to older ones. And right across here, you can see all the topics we cover. COVID-19 has its own special page for obvious reasons, because we've generated a flood of COVID stories since March. Arts and culture, economy and business, education, environment, ethics and religion, health, politics, science and tech. These are very broad topics. Each of those desks has 1 to 3 editors working on it, and we talk to each other constantly, mostly on Slack right now. But we talk all the time. So if you're thinking of pitching us and you're not sure where your research falls, just do our pitch form, pick the area that seems like a good fit. And if we don't think that's really the place for it, but it belongs over here, we just send it right over to our colleague, metaphorically right over there. So don't worry too much about where your categories fit. I will show you what it looks like to be an author and to get edited here. So we're going to go to my dashboard. Just going to show you all my stories I have in progress. This is a good thing to know too. When I was a journalist and was pitching stories, I knew intellectually that editors had lots of stories in the works at once, but once I had sent in a pitch, especially if I thought it was just a killer and it was really on target and it was such a good fit for this magazine, then it was waiting and waiting and waiting for a response. I would just be like, what could they possibly have to do that is more important than reading my pitch? And so this is the answer to this. So these are the stories I'm editing right now. All the ones in progress are ones where the author has submitted some text, and the other ones they're not due yet, or for other reasons they haven't sent stuff in. So this is what editors are managing at any given time. Let me see. I'm going to think of a good scholar dashboard to look at. David Montgomery. And I'm just picking this scholar because he's a very experienced geologist who has written several books and also has written for us a bunch of times. And he's just got a nice long record here to show. So when you write an article for us, here is one of his 8 or 9 articles for us. This was one of a series we do called Curious Kids, where we answer questions that are sent by actual kids, and they are written at a kid's reading level, but we market them just the same way we market all our other stories. So they're reprinted in the Washington Post and things like that. They tend to be these really basic questions that everyone's interested in, and they do really well. So anyway, when you write an article for us, the articles all have a picture at the top. Your profile is right here, and your byline is a live link to your author profile in our system. And that is so other scholars and other media outlets can reach you for more interviews, to ask you to be on a panel, for all those contacts that I talked about that can result from it. So here's David Montgomery's profile for us. This is what profiles look like. We have some biography, and people can list honors, they can put their media contacts, things like that. And you can see, let's see what he's done. He's got a whole bunch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, he's done a bunch for us. You know, if you write for us and you find that you enjoy doing it and it goes well, it can become a working relationship, an ongoing relationship like that. And of course, we like that because we don't have to explain to you every time how it works and everything. And you know, once you know how our system works, you can, if you find it rewarding, we're very happy about that. Let's see, I'm going to look at his dashboard. So every author who writes for us, every scholar who writes for us, once they have an article published, has a dashboard that aggregates. Let me see if I can move this down a little bit. I can't really move the menu here. Can people see the pie chart with where his stories have appeared? Because for me, it's partly covered by the profiles here. So you have a dashboard that shows metrics for how your articles have done for us. And if you write for us more than once, it aggregates the metrics for all of your articles. It shows you geographically where they've appeared. And you can see that articles often get picked up by outlets in other countries. That can include other conversation sites, but it can also be many other outlets. This is an aggregate of his readership over time. So he has gotten more than 500,000 views for things he's written for us. You can see the outlets that have most frequently have gotten the most views by republishing his pieces. See the most recent comments on them. So this is really neat because a lot of scholars include these metrics in their promotion packages and, you know, other things that they're using to show the impact of their work. So it's very exciting to be able to show that kind of thing. The dashboard you can break down and see the metrics for any particular story. So let's look at the beach sand story. See how that did. You can see from the little summary here, it got 44,000 views so far. The views that we show for our articles are not all of them, we know that. We have a software tracker when outlets republish our stories that we try very hard to get them to take. And if they use the button on our site, it just automatically does it. There are some outlets, including Tribune Publishing, which owns the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, and some others, that say that the tracking software doesn't work with their system, so they won't take it. So we always know there are more views out there than you see, but what you see are all the clicks that we can record. So that particular beach sand story, where does beach sand come from? Very simple story, which is a good example of how a simple explainer can do really well. 44,000 readers, republished in a bunch of countries, and picked up by a lot of different outlets. The Inertia is a website that covers surfing. And they take a lot of our ocean science stories because surfers are very interested in the state of the ocean. So it's kind of a fun one. So these are fairly small outlets for the most part, but you know, it adds up to a lot. These are many articles that we do have long tails. Let me find another one that's here. This is more of a sort of big news issue, deadly California mudslides. This was a couple of years ago after they had the big wildfires late in the fall, and then they've burned off the surface, and then you get the rains and the mudslides. So that was more newsy. So yeah, Salon took that. Courts, GovTech is a government site that, I don't know why they took that actually, but glad they did. You know, wide range of republishers here. Let me show what it looks like when you're working on an article and it's getting edited. So let's go back to David's beach sand story. It's gonna take a couple clicks to get back there. Come on, system. Here we go. All right. This is going to show us the editing history here. And I'm going to go to the very beginning of it. So this is, the interface here is pretty much like a Google document. So you can see the history of it and what it looked like at any point. So this is back at the beginning. It's not going to show the way it looks on the screen, but you can see sort of the edited text version. He submitted a draft that looks like this. You can see there aren't any real marks in this or changes. And then I came in and did a bunch of work on it. So if I just sort of slide through this timeline of the document, you'll see how things change. Let me go to his version. He came in, did a lot of work. These brackets and commas and things are for adding hyperlinks, where we have, the way we do references in our articles is having authors hyperlink to sources, and there are hyperlinks in all our articles. We want to see hyperlinks when you have a major claim or a big statistic, and there are a couple of reasons for having the hyperlinks. First of all, they emphasize that you are an expert on your topic. You know, you've studied it, you've published on it, you can back up what you say. they also give readers who want to know more a chance to go deeper and read the studies or the reports or whatever. So hyperlinks are a part of all of our articles. And I'll go to a published article so we can look at those in just a second. And then images and videos and things like that are also part of it. But anyway, so you can see David did some work on this. Then I did some more work on it. Things changed a bit more. Then some more. So several people, sometimes when you look at these timelines for articles, you have 5 or 6 people in there because you have the commissioning editor, a couple of different authors, then you have a second editor giving it a read when it's close to done, then you have the copy editor. So a lot happens between the beginning and end of an article. I could show you some that have much more complicated histories if you want to see them. But it is supposed to be a collaborative process. I'll show you an edit that I just sent to someone today. You can see my comments in there. Hold on a sec. This is a historian who just wrote a book about animal welfare, and he's writing about an outbreak of flu in horses in 1872 that cratered the US economy. It's a really interesting episode. So you can see questions from me in there to him. Here's a response from him to something that I suggested. We try to sort of go back and forth, and we tell authors how we think it'll work best, and we want to know if they're comfortable with that, or how would you like to say it. So we really try to work it out so everybody's happy with these things. These are the hyperlinks, the way we make them, and then I'll show you how it looks on a page. So here I am saying, do you have a source for this estimate? Can you link to one here? He's gone through most of the other comments. So add a few words for who this guy was. That's the comments. Here's what it looks like as it is now. So it obviously won't have all this bolding and stuff in it when it's published. But they can see, there's gonna be more pictures in this, more illustrations, things like that. But this gives you a little idea of the back and forth that goes on as you're working on an article with us like this. Let's see, why don't I go to some finished ones on the environment page, just to say a little about those. This is neat. This one just went up yesterday. This is by several young scholars. Lead author is a postdoc. The other 2 are PhD students at Berkeley. They published a big literature review. They're all environmental scientists, and they did a big literature review looking at the ecological impacts of fences around the world, and found that they're really huge and very pervasive and very little studied. And so they wrote an article that a journal published, calling for basically a new field of study called fence ecology. So this is summarizing their literature review and why they did what they did. So you can see they've got an interesting open here. What's the most common form of human infrastructure in the world? It may be fences. And they have some interesting statistics about fences. So that's a good example of getting people hooked in, interested in a story. Then they go on to say, fences are ubiquitous, but nobody really thinks about them. We did a big overall overview of what research there was. Here's what we found. So they go into things like that. We have a video here that's talking about the US-Mexico border wall and potential environmental effects. Here in the second section, this is typically where scholars back up and give some context for what they're doing. So these guys talk about how road ecology became a big field of study in the 1990s, and they think that fences should get the same kind of attention like that, and here's how we got involved in them. Third section, they start going into, here are the things we found, the impacts fences can have. Some are good, some are bad. And they go further into examples here with lots of different geographic areas, since they were really looking at this as a global topic. This is a diagram they had from their article, so we can put in things from your studies. And then conclusions. Here are some solutions, and of course more research is needed. The answer, the conclusion to every scholarly article. So that is a pretty typical structure for an article for us. All of the elements are important. Sorry, I was just going to say the illustrations, the links, the whole thing. It's a package.
I actually was just going to chime in and ask, because I know that through the conversation, this process is relatively straightforward. I've worked with your editors in the business section, and it is a very sort of hands-on back and forth type of a process. I guess the question or the curiosity I have is sort of taking a step back. Are most written media outlet processes like this, or is this somewhat unique to the conversation?
In my experience, I would say that a lot of them are like this. It kind of depends. I mean, you know, my experience is pretty unique to environment, science, and health outlets. I guess I would say, you know, a big outlet like an Audubon magazine or something, there's going to be a little bit more of not exactly a take it or leave it feel to the edits, but a little bit more of a sense. I mean, we're explicitly an outlet that is there for scholars to write for the public, and we're there to help them do it. So I think there's a little bit more of a kind of collaborative flavor typically to our work and our interactions. But, you know, if you're working with another outlet and you have a particular reason that, you know, it needs to be this term. I understand that it's a piece of terminology, but it really needs to be this. And the way you've suggested paraphrasing it is not, you know, scientifically or economically accurate or whatever. If you explain, you know, things to editors and say, here's the reason that this wouldn't be right to do it this way, you know, you can work things out like this. I had very few experiences where editors just completely said, it's like this, you can't change it. And this is one of those places to recognize that, you know, you as the expert and the journalist have a very big common interest in having it be right. And so if you can show an outlet, if you're having an issue with them, of how to say something that, you know, this is the way you have to do it, and if you do it this way, you would be inaccurate. You know, that's an approach that should work with them. And then you know, and as you build relationships, and I think that thinking about doing this kind of work in terms of building relationships with publications, with editors, with particular journalists, the more you can build relationships and work with people more than once, the easier that kind of back and forth becomes, because you know each other. You know, they know that you're an expert and you've delivered for them before, and they take your judgment seriously. Not that we wouldn't, you know, with a new author, but you get what I mean. You know, there's more of just a common experience there together. So, you know, thinking of building relationships where you can work with people more than once this way makes that kind of thing a lot easier.
I have a bit of a divergent question, if you're okay if we stray from this topic
Sure.
a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the dreaded phone call that we get from journalists on occasion, where we get that wave of anxiety, why are you calling me? I'm not sure what to say to you. What are you actually asking me? What are you looking for? Do you have any counsel or feedback or insights on how we could handle that? Because I think, you know, as a scholar, in my own sort of experiences, I feel like having the ability and the time to sit down and write things down to get it right feels a lot differently, feels more confident, feels more in control than having an hour to put something together for someone who's interested in some work that maybe I had done a while ago or something. So maybe some insights around that particular juxtaposition would be helpful.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, and I mean, it, as we were saying before this started, you know, first of all, realize that the reporter on the other end might not know anything about the subject and might be at least as scared as you are. So, you know, first of all, and I've in some, I don't know if anybody here has worked with a group called Compass. They're really science communications, so it may not, but they are a full-time group that works on helping scientists, both in academia and in other venues like government, communicate with the public. So then they do a lot of trainings that are like multi-day things with role playing and all kinds of stuff. One thing that they really emphasize is when you get one of those calls, you don't have to take it. You know, you don't have to take it right away. It is perfectly legit, especially if your first reaction is, you know, to just say, I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you in 15 minutes? You know, and the middle of something can be like your coffee, you know, it doesn't matter. But it is perfectly fine, you know, and I mean, if they can't wait 15 minutes and you're just sort of like having heart palpitations, then just be like, I'm sorry, I can't help you right now. You know, and that's life. And journalists often sit down with a list of like 10 numbers and just say, okay, I hope I can get a quote from one of these people. So they are perfectly used to that. So it is fine to just, you know, tell them I can call you in 15 or 20 minutes or something to give yourself some breathing room and to think about it. It is also perfectly fine to ask reporters who contact you like that, especially if they cold call you, some questions about what they're looking for. So, you know, what kind of article are you writing? Is it a quick news report? Is it a long analysis? Are you writing about someone else's study and you want a comment from me on whether it makes sense? You know, that kind of thing. So what are you doing and where do I fit in with it? So that's a good thing to give you a little perspective. And there's no reason that they, you know, should be unwilling to tell you that. They may not say something like, I'm looking for a really sexy quote to top this article, which might be their actual agenda. But sexy in a journalistic sense, let me say. But they'll give you at least a general sense of what they're looking for. And then if you don't know the outlet, if you're not familiar with it at all, tell them you'll call them in 15 minutes and Google them, and just see what they do, see whether they've published anything that's relevant to what they want to ask you about, and if you look at it and you think, oh my God, you can just call back and say, I'm sorry, but I don't think I'm a good source for you on this, or something like that. Or, you can have a little bit of discussion and say, I don't think that my work is really what you're looking for here. And they would rather have you say that if you don't think it's a good fit, or if you don't want to talk to them, than in spending like 20 minutes trying to get you to, give them a quotable quote and not getting it. So those are some things. And I just had another one on the tip of my tongue and lost it. It'll come to me soon. So go ahead. But do think of it as a conversation. It's not just they ask the question, you lob the answer back. You can have a conversation back and forth. And what I was going to say was, you can ask them in a nice way, kind of, is this your regular beat? Is this a topic you cover in depth? And you can say, so I know sort of how much I should explain to you, or how much background I should give. Tell me how much background you have on this issue. Like, do you normally cover this, or is this something you just got handed to you? And that's helpful, because that'll tell you, first of all, whether the person on the other end really knows what they're talking about, whether they, yes, I'm the regular business reporter and I've been on this beat for 3 years or something, or, no, actually, I usually do government, but I'm doing this story now. So that, and it gives you some sense of, do they really know where they are, and do you need to really explain stuff?
Does anybody else have questions right now about anything that we've covered so far? No other brave souls want to take a stab at pitching to Jenny?
It's a lot to absorb. I mean, I would say this is usually the response that we get when we do the talk initially, and then as people think about things, then they start, the emails start to come, and, what about this thing? And so why don't I say a little bit about sort of where we find ideas for stories, because it's a sort of multi-way street. First of all, we have a daily news meeting, and we go around, and everybody on the different desks talks about what they've got for to be posted the next morning. Then we talk about sort of what are big things in the news. So we say, okay, AstraZeneca, Oxford's vaccine results are out, and they're interesting, but there's this weird thing about them, and they're getting a lot of sort of mixed response from it. So do we want to do something on that? Do we want to wait a little bit and see what develops? That kind of thing. And so some of our stories are in response to issues in the news, especially when there's something really big happening, like most of California is on fire, or whatever the topic might be. As an outlet that reaches out to scholars to write the stories, as opposed to us writing them ourselves, we are not usually covering the breaking news. We're not sort of like providing the first on the scene, because we're not on the scene. We're all remote. We're not doing that sort of first report on the action. We're doing, at best, like a second day reaction, third day, fourth day response to things. And that's what, scholars are well positioned to do. So we're looking for people who can do commentary on what's going on, or reporting new research. Those are the main kinds of articles that we do. When we have ideas that come out of those daily news meetings, if someone knows a particular scholar who's good, we'll say, I'm going to go try my famine guy at Tufts Nutrition School, or something like that. But often we don't have a particular person in mind. And so schools like Clarkson, that are partner schools of ours and that work with us, get a list every day of particular topics that we're looking for. We call it the expert request, where we have a story in mind we'd like to do. We don't have a particular scholar. Who have you got, partner schools? And we ask them to send us names of people who might like to do it. I just, often those are reacting to breaking news, but sometimes they're not. I mean, I just put one on there. I'm looking for someone to write an article about magnetic induction cooktops, which I'm interested in because jurisdictions in California, most recently San Francisco, are starting to actually adopt regulations as a climate change policy, banning new construction buildings from installing natural gas hookups. They want to move people away from using natural gas for heating and cooking and things like that toward electricity, because it's easier to decarbonize your electricity supply than it is to decarbonize natural gas. So one place, I mean, I think probably not too many people will have giant philosophical reasons for having a gas furnace versus electric heat. But cooking is a very different thing. Anybody who likes to cook knows that gas heat is much easier to control, and it's the cook's choice, not electric. Magnetic induction is the sort of advanced option for that. And so I want to know I want to do an explainer of how magnetic induction works, and why is it so much less common in the US than it is in Europe and Asia, where it's actually much more heavily used. So our request can be just something like that. That's the editor's particular angle on something that we're curious about. Scholars pitch articles to us, which can be reactions to the news, articles on new research, things based on new books can be really interesting. If you have a book coming out, we certainly would love to know about it, and whether there's some kind of angle where you'd like to write an article for us about it. We once in a while do things like reactions to new movies. Actually, our arts editor just is posting something tomorrow that is sort of a reaction to the Ron Howard production of Hillbilly Elegy, his movie version of Hillbilly Elegy, looking at how the critical response has been really negative, but the popular response has been very positive, and what kind of productions do you get that divergence in. I got someone to write about the movie Deepwater Horizon a couple of years ago, who was a petroleum geologist, and we asked him to look at it and watch the movie and tell us how well he thought it showed what happens on an oil rig. And he took a bunch of his grad students, and they all watched it and went out to dinner together and then talked it over, and they wrote a great article about it. It was really fun. So there are lots of ways that scholars can use their expertise to sort of, share ideas with people.
There's actually a couple questions that have come in based on something that you had just touched upon.
Okay.
And that had to do with how, as a partner school, you'll send topical areas to Clarkson and say, hey, who do you have that may be an expert in these spaces? So from a standpoint of the inside Clarkson experience, I am making an assumption by thinking that Melissa and Melissa's office perhaps has that list of individuals with expertise. So if you could just maybe a little bit, either Melissa or Jenny, talk about what does that look like once it reaches Clarkson, and then how do we as authors kind of channel that back upwards?
So like Jenny said, every day I get this email, and I'm always waiting for it. It comes about noon, and I get really excited, because a lot of the time they're the faster you respond, the better to some of them, like she said, especially the breaking news ones that they're looking for. We've gotten several pieces commissioned off of that, and so today's came, and I fired it off to Tom Langen, because two of them are about biology. And so see if we've got anybody that might be able to talk about those. What are proteins, and why do we need to disable them in the coronavirus? So honestly, some of it is that if I see it and I know, oh my gosh, Jen Knack talks about that. That's her area. I'm going to forward that to her, and maybe she can write an article about it really quick, or whatever. I try to forward it on to department heads, specifically if I don't know, oh, I know that somebody in biology might do it, so I'm going to just go with whoever's maybe the dean or whatever. But if I know specifically, Alex Cohen, for example, has done a lot of stuff for Clarkson with the conversation on politics. And so he's done a lot of them. So I will look and forward the political ones or things like that to Alex and Stephen Bird and things like that. So it's just kind of an everyday thing. We're also working, Kelly and I and Jessica Carista and Allison Power and I are all working with Julie Davis's team to create our faculty experts database on our website. So you're going to get an email from us with a survey saying what our 4 areas that we have of our research, where do you fall under that? And then what media topics would you say that you might fall under when I give you a list of them? And so we're trying to hone in more so that it makes it faster for me to be able to go, oh, Amber can talk about that, John could talk about that, and I can fire off these emails to you guys, and then you can contact the editor, because some of these are by tomorrow. Some of them say flexible, like Jenny's magnetic cooktop ones is flexible. Right. So but
that one's wide open right now.
Yeah. So I can certainly forward this onto this group for today's requests.
But I guess here's sort of a related question that might fall under the follow-up question heading. So how does the process then change for an author? Because typically, if we want to pitch something, we go to the site or we communicate with an editor who we may have worked with before. So now that there are specific topical areas that are deemed interesting to the conversation, and Melissa forwards them to us, do we then just immediately communicate with you, Melissa? Or does the pitch process change, I guess is the question.
I'll let Jenny answer that.
It really, you know, if the scholar wants to just email the editor at that point, we're fine with that. You know, there is always an editor as a contact on those expert requests. So if the scholar wants to just, you know, contact them, that's fine. Or sometimes the communications person likes to write an email making the introduction if we don't know each other, because then they can sort of make sure the scholar knows, okay, you're on deck now. You know, here you go. You know, the baton is in your hand now. Take it and run. So, you know, however you guys want to do it is fine with us. It's not like there's like one particular sort of process that has to happen at that point. Just the idea is to get the editor and the scholar connected so that then they can talk a little more and say, okay, is this really something that you would like to, you know, that you feel is in your wheelhouse, that you would like to write about it? Tell me what you think would be the big things to say. So, and we realize that we put a lot of these requests out and no one takes them, or people offer to reply, but they're just not right or something. So it's sort of our version of, you know, pitching something and not having it stick. You know, it happens all the time. I'm like, I may not get anybody on magnetic induction cooktops, you know, and that's life. But yeah, it's just, so, I mean, there are a lot of ways that we sort of find things like that. I mean, we editors are at the same time are contacting scholars that we know specifically do certain topics that, you know, that we want to do. So, you know, I've got requests out to specific scholars that I know. I've got requests out to ones that I don't know, but who I keep in a spreadsheet so I won't forget their names, because I saw a study that they had that just came out that sounded super cool. So we have like multiple channels going all the time. It's an ADD kind of job.
Yeah, and a lot of the time I honestly like to just let you go with the editor, because, you know, I'm not gonna work with you, you know, I'm not gonna go back and forth with you guys with it. So, you know, if you feel comfortable going for it, go for it. If not, you know, I'm here for you too. So it's totally up to you guys. So we're all about it. And, you know,
some
whatever I can do.
like to have the communications people really wired in there at the early stages. Sometimes a scholar likes to have a communications person actually sort of not obviously helping write the article, but like able to view the article. Sometimes I find that when they're in English as a second language or something, that just gives them a comfort level. So,
Right.
You know, there's all different ways we can work the relationship out. We want to know that the scholar is writing the article, but beyond that, you know, and I mean, and I feel like if the scholar wants to talk to you guys about how to organize it or how can I write a better opening or something, I'm like, great, do that, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whatever we can do to help.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And see, because we all want basically the same thing, you know, we want your expertise out there in a timely and readable way. So.
Any other burning questions about talking to the mysterious media?
I have a quick question. So you mentioned that some of the hyperlinks you're looking for would be like things that you've published. Do you only want pitches that have to do with your area that you've published in, or things that you teach on and kind of like your broader expertise of an area? Just trying to get a feel for like what I might pitch or volunteer for.
That's an excellent question. In general, we want to make sure that scholars are writing about things that we sort of say are in your wheelhouse, which can be that you have researched or that you teach. We want to know that you've got, you know, you've spent some time and work on that topic. And the reason for that is that we try really hard to distinguish the articles we publish from the op-eds that you see in newspapers typically, which are written for a sort of different purpose than ours. A conventional newspaper op-ed usually is selling some kind of a call to action. Lock him up, vote her out, you know, all these things, you know, whatever it might be. This must be done now, you know, support this, oppose that. And what the articles that we're trying to present often can have a very strong conclusion to them and can recommend things, but we want them to be grounded in the scholar's expertise. They always come from the scholar's knowledge. That's, you know, as opposed to being by someone who has a really strong opinion, but isn't necessarily the expert on those things. I mean, I was a public interest lobbyist way back in my pre-journalism life. And I mean, I wrote op-eds representing the organization I worked for on things like why a national ballistic missile defense system was not a good use of public money. Now, I was not an expert on ballistic missile defense, but my job was to represent this organization that felt that way. So I did that. But, you know, the conversation would not have hired me to write about ballistic missile defense. So we want to know that you've got some grounding in that area. The more junior you are in your career, the more sort of strict we are with that. So for example, the first you have to be, to write for us as a sole author, you have to be at least a PhD student. And our sort of thinking behind that is that's when you start creating knowledge, right? So, you know, who's a scholar? If scholars write for us, that's when you start being a scholar. Master's students can write for us if they write with a more senior scholar who they've worked with on something. And in both cases for grad students, they have to be writing about something that's their dissertation research or something they've worked very directly on. So we would not let a junior, like a political science PhD student who is researching voting rights, opine about impeachment and the Constitution. Because, you know, I mean, yeah, sure, I'm sure they know something about the Constitution, but, you know, that's not really what they do. So we want someone who's really studied impeachment and what the fathers thought about it and stuff. So that's our general thinking. For things that we use for links in the story, they don't all have to be your work. They don't necessarily have to be your work at all, depending on what you've done. I mean, the guy who wrote about, you know, the Deepwater Horizon movie for us didn't have to link to technical stuff he'd written on offshore oil drilling. He was a pretty senior guy in his field, and he had spent time on rigs, a lot of time on rigs. So, you know, it was like, yes, he can tell us, you know, if this Mark Wahlberg is, you know, doing, if what Mark Wahlberg is doing in this movie is actually what his character would have done, you know, stuff like that. So, you know, so for references, what we do want to see for those links, though, is some things that support your major claims. So, which gets back to that idea of you're an expert and your article is grounded in knowledge. You know, whether it's your knowledge or someone else's, we want to see that you can point to things that back up what you say. We like to see that some of it is yours if it's an area that you've researched, and we like to see that at least some of your sources are peer reviewed, because that gives us some sense that, you know, you know what you're talking about and you're pointing to sources. We will look at those and we will say, this article doesn't say what you claim it says. You need to find another one. So, you know, we will look at stuff like that as we're editing and reviewing an article. But that's the kind of thing we look for. When you're citing, you want sources for like something about, you know, the March for Science or something. I mean, we like to see not using, you know, I don't know, Greenpeace, just to pick an example of a group that's got a very strong perspective and advocacy thing, unless you're talking about something like what advocates think of things. So we like to go for sort of mainstream sources for things like what's the market potential for renewable energy, things like that. Yeah.
Here's an unrelated question. Is there a season in terms of ebbs and flows where the conversation gets inundated with pitches versus perhaps that quieter time? Is there a differentiation?
Yeah. In a normal year, which is not 2020, there are certain times when we do get lulls. And I would say usually the first 2 or 3 weeks of January often is pretty quiet, because a lot of people are on winter breaks and a lot of schools are on break. Scholars sometimes travel, go to meetings, things like that. I have noticed that late January to say mid-August, pitches often slow down then, because a lot of people are getting in their vacations. Mid-August, they pick up again, because a lot of the state schools at least start coming in and getting started then. This year has been like nothing else. Our traffic on our site and the amount of views our stories get through publication is probably double what it used to be. At points this year, it's been triple, and the volume of pitches has been huge too. Mainly on COVID, but also on election-related things, and also on just everything people feel strong about. So as we get to be more known and more visible and more connected with republishers, we just get busier in general. I would say trying to time things beyond sort of those few windows that I've thought of. You know, if you've got a good idea, send it to us. And if it's a good time for you. So that's the other thing to be thinking about is not just, you know, is this timely, but is it a good time for you to be doing it? Because of course, you know, like I said, you've got jobs, you've got day jobs that involve a lot of things that you're actually getting paid to do. So, and we understand that. I mean, it's frustrating for us when someone pitches a good idea and then can't respond to edits for a month, and then it's a lot less fresh when they finally get to it. So actually, that raises another thing that, let me just say, which is a common question, was we do get scholars who try to think about, okay, I study water issues and World Water Day is coming. And so sometimes they say, oh, World Water Day is coming, and so here's my story. Although sometimes what they do is World Water Day is Tuesday, and they send us a pitch the Friday before and say, this is a great story for World Water Day. And our response is, it's a good idea, but we commissioned something on that 2 weeks ago, and there really isn't time in the next 2 business days to get a story done for World Water Day. So if you know of an anniversary, a major date like that, some kind of date that's a news peg, we do like to have at least usually a week's worth of notice when you pitch ahead of time, because it takes a certain number of days to do a story, and we've all got 10, 15, 20 other stories in our queues that are all getting different levels of attention. So that's a good thing to know about with respect to timing, is that, at least a week, I would say a week up to anywhere like 2 months is a good amount of lead time for something. More than that, people tend to forget about it, even if it's on their calendars. So, I will assign stories 6 months out if I know of something really important in 6 months and someone has, a great angle on it, I'll assign it. I just don't usually think that far ahead, though, which is a way that our fields differ, journalism and scholars.
Now, because you've given us the presentation today, Jenny, I know that you are specific to a particular topical area, generally speaking, in terms of your editor load. Are you welcoming of emails directly to you, or would you prefer that our emails go to the topical matter people?
I would say if you have a question about pitching in a certain area, like as distinguished from a pitch itself, if you're sending a pitch itself through our form, just pick the desk that seems like the best fit. And if it's not, we'll figure out where it should go, and you will get a response within a week, because you're a partner school. If you just want to ask a question about, like, is this a story or not, look for the editor who's on that desk, or an editor on that desk. That's the best thing to do, because I can't tell you, I talk to our business editor fairly often because we sort of have an overlap on sustainability stories. So we end up figuring out, oh, this is in our overlap zone, who wants it. But I don't know if it's a more businessy story, really, what his angle is, or, and I aspire to read all of our news stories every day, but I almost never am able to do all that because I have other things to edit and stuff. So I honestly don't always know if we've actually just done something on a topic in other areas. So if you just have a question about, like, are you looking for stuff on this, the best thing to do would be to go to someone on the desk that's relevant. And those are on our webpage. If you just scroll all the way down to the bottom, there's a button that says Our Team, and you can see the names and the emails of all the editors on the different desks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Because if you email me about a business story, I'll just ask Brian and then tell you what Brian says. So you might as well just ask Brian yourself.
Any other questions for Jenny? Oh, hearing crickets, seeing tumbleweed.
Yeah. People going, we just finished the semester. My brain is drained.
Well, I think everybody in the chat that provided some thoughtful feedback, everybody who's been talking, thank you so much for being here. Jenny, thank you for your time. And if there's anything else that you wanted to kind of close with, yeah, obviously we can do that. But if not, this has been fantastic for us. And I actually think that's, all these little tidbits of information, although there are a lot of them and some of them are sort of itty bitty nuggets, they're so helpful. So thank you for sharing.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for listening, because we know, like I said, that this is different from what scholars do every day. And so we understand that it's a reach and it's some extra effort. Let me make one suggestion, and I will share for one more second my screen, because if you want to just, in an ongoing way, see what we're doing in your area and kind of know what we're interested in, the best thing to do is subscribe to our e-newsletter. And if you get that, you will get one email in your inbox in the morning on weekdays that has links to our news stories, and that is all. There are no ads, there are no spam, and I will show you where it is to subscribe. So this is back to my fence story. I'm going to our homepage. get newsletter right here. And you just put your email in there and confirm it, and you get it. You can also get newsletters that are science only once a week, politics only once a week. You can get just the weekend one. There's a lot of different options, but just getting that and just looking at what the news story topics are by day in your area, you're going to start to get a feel for our angles and how we frame things and what we're doing. And you may, as you're looking at them, go, oh, well, this would be another way of looking at that, you know, and there you are, there's your first idea. So I would advocate doing that.
All right. Well, thank you so much for all of this great guidance and counsel. We appreciate having you today. And thank you all for being here. And the NSF Advanced team obviously tries to put on various events that are like this one. And we obviously have a bit of a diverse offering. So please keep your eye out for the daily newsletter. We usually put our advertisements in there. Or you could reach out to any of us, like Sarah and like myself, and we'll obviously guide you in the right direction when we have these types of events. So if that's it, then everybody have a great afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks, Jenny.